Good morning.
Morning.
I'd like to call this, Committee of Shared Services to order and to open it. I'd like to have a motion to approve the, last minutes of the, Shared Services Committee, which was a while back, so if anybody has their, thinking caps on, that was a long time ago. But I'd like to have a motion to approve those meetings, and that was back in, I believe, April, is that correct, Amanda?
I think so.
Okay. Motion, by, Mr. Conover, second by Ms. Frazier, thank you. All in favor of approving those minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. I sat down with, Julie Butler, who's an expert in, shared services, and efficiency planning and so forth. And, I, like many of the other supervisors, are probably learning a lot. This agenda was put together by Julie because of the fact that, I feel that her expertise in this area is where we should, be leaning on. And, I took a ton of notes when I sat down with her for 2-3 hours. I did a lot of research, but I'm gonna let her, control part of this agenda today because of the fact that, it's the issues that she needs and to address to help all the individual towns, achieve, better efficiency, purchasing. So, without further ado, Julie, I'd like to thank you, and I'll hand it over to you.
You're welcome. Good morning, everyone. As you'll see, item A on the agenda is basically an opportunity to discuss the intermunicipal agreement. If anybody has any questions, I think the latest, Brian, was that everybody had a copy to take to their town board.
We sent them out to the appropriate town boards, to the village, to the city, to the fire districts. So
Okay.
we're just waiting returns of those signed.
Does anybody have any issues with the agreement or questions?
Mr. Supervisor Leggett?
We don't have to buy commodities.
Well, yes and no. If you give me the estimates, or your town highway supers give me estimates, and those estimates are included in the bid, then they are committed to that. You know, basically the way it's set up is that our office is gonna determine the best way to procure your goods. If leaving it with the town is the best way to go, then that's what we're gonna recommend. If there are, 5 other towns, or the city or the village, that are buying the same thing, then we're gonna recommend that we do a consolidated bid.
We said we give you numbers, you basically bid.
You're committed, yes. Because the vendors are giving pricing based on those quantities. So, we can't give them quantities of 50,000 and then end up buying 20. That's not fair to them. We're gonna lose our vendors, and, we certainly don't wanna do that because we're limited in this area for some of the vendors that we have. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Supervisor Simpson?
I have a question, Julie, on,
Yeah.
you've been purchasing our fuel through our heating oil and kerosene, propane through the state contracts.
Mhm.
We're gonna continue to contact
For now,
the city?
yes.
Okay.
We used to do a bid for heating oil, kerosene, propane, but it was determined by DPW that actually state contract was better. So until those prices go up and we feel that we could get a better bid doing it in-house, we'll continue to do that. Even though they're on the list, I wanted an idea of who was buying what. So everything on this list is a possibility where we could consolidate, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to.
Thank you, Julie. And this is the list you're pertaining to, correct?
Correct.
This is the list that, each town should have received, of what all the individual areas are that Warren County can purchase. And she's done a great job. She spent a ton of time, who's responded to what item and so forth and so on. It is actually very, very, complicated, but the ultimate goal is obviously to save the town's money.
Mhm.
And, when I sat down with her, she started going through this chart, and I'm thinking, holy mackerel. So, you supervisors that represent your towns have a lot of work, but a lot of opportunity, the way I see it, if we follow a lot of Julie's, lead. Go ahead.
Okay, item B was something that Supervisor Beatty and I discussed. You know, I know it's difficult for your staff members possibly to accept change and maybe some additional responsibilities that are gonna come out of this. So, what we're proposing, and certainly if you have any better ideas, I'm open to it, was having like an informational meeting, you know, have everybody come over to the third floor conference room by my office, and we'll walk them through basically what's expected, or, you know, try to get ideas from them maybe as to what is the best way to go about, compiling these quantities and keeping track, and, because I certainly don't wanna make it more difficult for everybody, but in order for this to work, we have to have accurate numbers and, you know, get the best information that we can possibly get.
Just an added note on that, the reason why we put that on the agenda is because after conversing with Julie for a number of hours, I said, well, why wouldn't everybody do this? I mean, why wouldn't all towns wanna save money, you know, and so forth, and participate? And I understand, a lot of towns are small, and they don't have the resources, you know. Also, I understand, about relationships, and some of the town purchasing have built relationships with certain manufacturers, and so forth. And so there's an uncomfortable level, okay, going forward, 'cause this is new stuff for the most part. This is all new to them. So, I suggest, well, actually, I think it was Julie, or maybe both of us, I said, how can we get their comfort level up so that they give accurate numbers to Julie, so that she can then go to the manufacturer and get a better savings, okay? And so that's why we suggested a type of informal meeting with town, village, or city staff, you know, so they get a comfort level, and they understand what she needs to have to get the number to go to the manufacturer, so we can all share in these services and costs. So, I think that's a great idea. I think she had it. I think it's a great idea. So we can explore that further if people are interested in that. We can explore that further and try to set up what's most convenient for everyone. And we can have that discussion at the next meeting, or even sooner than that. So maybe I'll send an email out and see if we can nail a little more detail. But did you wanna add anything to that, Julie?
I do, you know, and as far as adding some work or responsibilities up front, it's actually gonna shift their workload to more, you know, data analysis, rather than taking the time to obtain the quotes or do the bid themselves. So I think it's gonna be a wash in the end as to how much more is expected of them. You know, I have the resources to take this stuff on. They don't necessarily, you know, have the time or the manpower to do that.
Supervisor Leggett?
Would a meeting like that include everything from office supplies to highway?
Everything,
Everything.
yes.
Yep.
Any commodities,
Would this chart be the outline, basically?
that would, yes.
So the chart, again, would be the outline. Do we have a copy of the chart? I can get you a
Chart
copy.
should have been attached to the,
We
intermunicipal
recently sent that
agreement.
out. Yeah, it was with the agreement that was sent out.
Is that the chart?
Yeah, this is the chart. We got some copies made right now, though, Supervisor.
okay.
When was that sent out?
Yeah, that's my problem, I don't think I got it.
Well, we'll make copies right now, and what,
I don't,
It was,
I just,
yes.
I might have overlooked it.
No, it was, sent out to the supervisors to take to the town boards, or the city,
I do remember seeing.
would have gone to the mayor.
did you get one?
I
do remember. And I
think I did.
put it out at my last committee meeting, which you are not on my committee, so I have, I can make you a copy of
I'll
it.
tell you what, we got about 5 conversations going on here
Advisors.
right now. Could I see a show of hands on who received that information? The municipal contract, who did receive that? So we got 3 or 4, and then we got people who didn't?
I'm not sure.
That doesn't have
Okay,
a chart.
so what I'm gonna ask, Brian to do is to resend out, if you would please, to everyone, even if you got it, let's just double down and make sure that information is out to each town, because how important obviously it really is. So that will solve that issue. Yes, Supervisor Simpson?
You were talking about having a meeting to explain this. Might I suggest maybe setting something up for the superintendent's meeting that they have monthly, maybe with Jeff? Because I think the highway superintendent are the ones that, unless we can get them there, but I think it might be confusing, dealing with the general and the highway. One time that I think it was just the highway is the most.
So you're suggesting that at the superintendent meeting that we
They have a,
piggyback onto that, is that correct?
yeah, I was thinking, do you know, Kevin, don't they have?
Yeah,
monthly?
they have a monthly, highway superintendents, most of them go to this monthly meeting, it'd probably be good to invite Julian. I gotta say, for the most part, I know our highway superintendent uses the county bids, religiously. They go to the county bid, and I know office supplies, we're behaving pretty well.
Everybody's slowly getting on board with office
So,
supplies.
but I think that's a good idea, because if you bring people who buy office supplies and janitorial supplies in with the guy who's buying rock salt and, trucks, I think for the most part, you're gonna find that we are following the bidding procedures. Maybe a little lax there on certain things.
Okay, so I think that's a great suggestion, Supervisor. Piggybacking onto the monthly the superintendent's meeting, highway superintendent's meeting. So I guess, the next question would be, can we find out when that next one is? And if
Call Kevin Hajo, see if
I can call him when I
okay,
get back to the
Julie will
office.
find out.
Yep.
And so if, you would pass along that information to all your towns too, saying we're going to be taking it up a little notch, the information flow, and having Julie there, and so if they come a little bit prepared for that meeting, obviously that will only benefit all of us, on the committee. Thank you. What else, Julie?
All right, the only other thing I have on here is, going back to tracking, annual expenditures for certain commodities. I attached, an Excel spreadsheet to the agenda, and it basically gives the information that I would need from the highway supers or the office staff for different types of commodities. I don't know if that would work, I don't know if they all use Excel, but I could certainly reformat this in any format that they would use to be able to, every time they place an order for guide rail, to track it on the spreadsheet, and then every year when we do the bid, they could just send me a copy of the spreadsheet. I envision that they would have one for each type of commodity or each group of commodities. Again, open for discussion, but this is something that, I developed just as a preliminary thought, to get started.
just to plug in the numbers then.
Well, it requires, the item description, purchase dates, the quantity, their most recent cost when they were buying not from our bid, because I have to track the savings for the efficiency plan.
Yeah.
So I have to have a baseline for whether or not this is working. The delivery location, because we're gonna have to list those delivery locations to the best of our knowledge in our specs. And then any of the vendors they're using. That's kind of a way for us to expand our vendor list and possibly get more competition. And if the vendors understand it's an all or nothing award, they're not gonna be able to go to the town highway superintendents and undercut our price.
We've already had that happen to us.
Yeah, and that's what they do. These same vendors are submitting bids to us and losing, and then turning around and going to the towns and saying they're gonna give you guys a better price.
That happened in the highway area.
It's very common.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, the initial setup using the Excel spreadsheet would take some time and would take some effort. But once set up, obviously, then the time involved goes down dramatically. Is that correct?
Right. I mean, they could use the same spreadsheet every year and just change their numbers and their dates.
Okay, so that will take away the fear of, geez, I gotta spend all this time doing it initially, and, you know, obviously it's a one-time Charlie, and then after that, it's just an update. And you make a great point. Sometimes manufacturers, and, you know, we've all been in business, sometimes manufacturers, they get turned down on a county level, and then they go to an individual town and say, hey, you know something? I can get you a better deal, because they need to show some sales, some numbers, all right? That doesn't behoove any of us, I don't believe. All it does is puts cracks in the system, and it doesn't really, at the end of the day, help all our costs. Because the more, it's simple business, the more we purchase of something, the better price we should be getting. It's that simple. But if they try to divide and conquer us, thank you, and go to individual towns and try to put those cracks, that's where I have a big concern, and that's where Julie's trying to tie this all together, so that doesn't happen. What else do you got, Julie?
Just one final thing, as some of you know, we did do some test case bids this spring. We did galvanized guide rail, aluminum sign blanks, and corrugated poly pipe and fittings. And just by putting our estimated quantities in and including some of the towns and the county's estimates, with the guide rail, we've got an estimated savings of $16,500 countywide.
Wow.
Aluminum sign blanks was lower, that was $1,600. And then for the poly pipe, it's around $10,650. So if we can, you know, add more quantity to that with everybody, those numbers are just gonna go up.
I think that's really significant. That was, I had it in my head very quickly, it's probably around $30,000. I mean, here we are, and every dollar is a taxpayer dollar. Just by doing those three line items, there's over $30,000 savings, and that's significant. And to me, as we get everybody on board, and hopefully the towns will make that decision, and all these different line items, there could be some major savings across the board for your towns and obviously the county. So I'm strongly encouraging that. What else you have, Julie?
That was all I had.
I'm gonna open up the floor now to questions. Everybody's been asking as we go along, but does anyone have any questions?
Julie, have we given you, wastewater treatment chemicals specifically?
We have not gone that far yet, only because the intermunicipal agreements don't start until July 1st. So once we had the commitment from the towns, we were gonna start diving into things that we haven't done before. And that's something the county doesn't buy, so.
Right, but some of us, and I think on water treatment plants, I'm sure most of us use the same type of chemicals we're required to, so.
Right, and we have that on the list
Yeah, I
because
saw it.
we took, basically I took what the county currently bids, and then I went through the city of Glens Falls. They gave me a stack of POs like that, and I went through and consolidated all those and added any of those to the bid, and then that was the basis for that list. And then I sent that out to the other towns to see where they could, cooperate.
Other questions? Other comments? Anybody who wants to make a comment on what they're, I know this is it's still very new to a lot of people, a lot of towns, and again, I don't wanna stress, I wanna stress how much savings potential there is for towns and the county, and that's what we're all about, getting the biggest bang for our buck. So, quantity dictates lower pricing. It's almost as simple as that. So,
Can I just make one?
yeah, sure.
This isn't gonna work on everything, and I don't want everybody to think that it is, because there are some commodities that we buy that it is what it is. Sometimes the manufacturer gives us, you know, a standard price that they're required to bid. You know, they're not gonna be able to negotiate that any lower. But I think across the board, at the end of the day, we'll be able to show enough savings that it's gonna look like it's gonna be successful for everybody.
Well, you've already saved $30,000. I mean, just on those few line items. To me, that's really significant. Any other questions? All right, so just to recap then, we will have Julie, you'll find out when the superintendent's meeting is. You'll piggyback onto that. Hopefully, how are we gonna get the word out to all the other towns that aren't, the supervisors aren't here? How will that happen?
I can send an email, or I can send them a copy of today's committee minutes and
Okay.
say this is what was discussed and,
But,
The only thing I will say, you know, we have very limited resources to go through and gather this information, so it will take time.
Mhm.
And with their daily work, this is, you gotta assign somebody this, who uses Excel and get it done. We'll get it done, but it won't happen in a week's time. It may take 2 weeks, it may take them a month to do it. But I gotta say, from my experience, our highway guys, most of them are using the county contracts right now. So I would be very surprised that if they deviated from what is bid.
that's a great comment, Mr. Chairman. Is there a time-sensitive issue here with manufacturers and getting the information you need on quantities?
well, manufacturers, no, but our bidding process, yes. I mean, basically, Kevin Hajos has put all of our bids on a schedule where he feels we're gonna get the best pricing. So with these few bids that we did, we started months in advance knowing this was gonna be difficult for the towns, and we still didn't get all the information we needed by the time we put the bid out. So, you know, I can only do what I can do and go that far in advance.
And, so, I understand Supervisor, Garrity's challenge. All the towns are strapped for resources. They just don't have extra people sitting around saying, hey, I'm ready to dig into this project. On the other hand, though, if we can stress the importance of saving money, okay, and putting effort into this, especially the initial go-round, and then it's a maintenance issue and so forth. So, at first, yeah, it's top-loaded with personnel, hours, and then you're gonna start reaping the rewards that she's able to bid them out. But her point is, it is somewhat time-sensitive. She started it back, as she told me, in a meeting 5-6 months ago, and didn't really get a lot of response from some towns. And I understand, again, I'm very understanding of the limited resources. But to me, you guys as leaders have to find a way to get those resources used so you save money and just do the best you can. So, that's all I can say. I know it's challenging both ways. Anything else?
One question, on this sheet, where are we going back to start from? Like the first of this year?
No, it depends on each commodity that we're bidding. I mean, sometimes if it's a highway commodity, we only need your construction season worth. You know, we're not gonna ask you, obviously, to look through records when you know you're not buying that commodity. But, you know, if we're doing a bid in September, we'd like you to go back to the previous September and get as much information as we can. Or if you wanna do the previous year, if it's easier to do an annual term, or a calendar year, you know, we'll accept that if the numbers are accurate, so.
Are you gonna be specific to them on when you do this meeting, or even before, on just what you asked, which is like, I need information for a year on this line item, but I only need information for maybe 6 months on this line item? Will you be a little more specific with them, or I don't know if you can, or what?
It's really on a case-by-case basis.
Line by line, you mean, or town by town?
Item by
Yeah, item by item, that's what I mean.
right.
Line by line, item by item.
I'll do my best to go through that list and try to determine,
That
what the
would be,
best term
that
is.
would be helpful, and if you would send that out, obviously, to all the supervisors, that would be very helpful, so that the highway superintendents have a strong idea on the time frame in which the material you need, you know.
And the other thing is, if you know that there's a specific project, say, you know, this summer or next summer, and you're gonna need an increased quantity for that project, you know, obviously we'll wanna know that too. And we'll put right in the bid specs, like we did for Lake Luzerne, you know, if you know your quantities, that would be ideal, but if you know that there's a project, you're not sure of the quantities, we will say, you know, the town of Lake Luzerne has a project where they're gonna need guide rail. So they know they're gonna be getting the bid for that as well, even though it's not factored into the actual numbers.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Conover?
Yeah, because there's a year delay, you gonna incorporate Clear Lane into your salt, bid spec? We don't use, rock salt any longer. More and more, the better salts are being used. Just wondering if we could get a better price if we, not only bid salt, but also bid, the Clear Lane.
You know, I've talked to DPW about the salt bid several times, and they've been resistant to bidding that out only because we may not get the same, you know, everybody submits a requirement letter for the amount of salt that they need. And it's usually well in advance.
It's already been.
It's now, right, which makes it difficult.
It's a year delay now, because it has to be ordered.
Right. So that's always been an issue, and they're afraid that if we do our own bid, we won't get the same, they won't take us as seriously as they do the state bid, basically. I mean, we can put the language in there, but if they run out of salt based on state requirements, we're not gonna get ours. So that, it's been kind of a challenge in that respect. I mean, we could certainly try it, but I'm not sure how it's gonna work.
Okay.
I'll make a note.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to item 4, which is referrals and pending items. And being that there are 0, we'll move on to item 5, information for discussion and review. I think everybody's had ample time to discuss any of the, and ask any of the questions, seeing that there's none. So I'm gonna now ask this, do we have a motion to close the meeting? Motion by Mr. McDonald, second by Mr. Oh, you have a question, Mr.
Yeah, before you
Supervisor?
close, I think,
Yep.
At the, public safety meeting the other day at the, old, Office of Emergency Services, there was quite a discussion about EMS service, within the county. And, at one point it was questioned whether it should be referred to this committee. I just think that, this committee should be aware of it, and that, I think the consensus was maybe Queensbury and Glens Falls don't really have too many problems, but a lot of the other towns do. And, I think it's gonna be flushed out more, and at some point I think it will be at this committee.
All right, thank you. Good point. Any other comments?
Get it on the radar.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. I think Mr. McDonald, you wanted to adjourn. Did you pass that? Do I have a second? Mr. Conover? All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Against? Okay. Meeting adjourned.
Tell you, girl.